Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Extra Shift. I'm Chris, and I'm here as always with Brendon. How are we going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, it's getting real close to NHL season. I've done like 1 3/4 of an NHL draft, like a fantasy draft. I finished one. I've got another one in like 2 nights' time, and I've got one that's a slow draft that's been going on now for about 2 weeks and should finish in this week sometime.
You certainly do have one. You certainly do have one in 2 nights' time. I'm going to actually be out while that draft happens. I don't know how I'm doing it, but you better believe I'm doing it.
Oh no! Well, I don't think it's going to take very long because, to roll back the curtain a little bit, Chris and I are in the same league now. It's a league I've been running for actually about 10 years. Like literally, I think I started in the 13-14 season, and my team that year was Carlsons of Anarchy, and I won that first year just barely with Eric Carlson when he was young and still on the stands. And so, but it's still going. I've got a trophy and everything, and we're drafting this week. But it was a league that we made when we didn't really necessarily understand like the standard in it, like fantasy format. So it's like a full NHL team size, which isn't usually what you do for fantasy. But people, everyone's been playing it for a long time. We really like that in terms of depth because there's actually not a lot of people in that league. So our drafts don't take that long because you can keep 10 players and you draft something like 16 or something.
Austin Matthews, baby. Austin Matthews.
Yeah. So we'll let you know how we'll commiserate or
last season, by the way.
The next draft.
Last season, by the way, for everybody's benefit, was the first season I made the playoffs. Yes. I was normally rock bottom, and last year was my rise to mediocrity, folks. And if it wasn't for a couple of COVID scares at the start of the season, much better too. But anyway, I'm not planning that. My trip to from tears to effing glory isn't quite complete yet, but it is episode 196.
It is, yeah. We're getting back to we're getting real close to that 200. We're getting back into the 90s with recognizable players. Mikko Rantanen for one.
Mikko Rantanen, Timo Meier, well-known former Shark, but of course only wearing it for New Jersey, the bastard. And outside of that, Jack Roslovic, character guy at the Columbus Blue Jackets. We'll talk about them in a bit. I like going through these lists looking for, noted Shark. I don't have one again because Timo Meier, Judas. No, look, and Pavel Bure, technically.
Yeah.
Technically. While on IR with the Canucks.
Yeah, looking down this list, my favorite standout name is Emerson Edom,
yes.
who wore it for 1 year for the Rangers, only entirely because of the terrible Twitter meme about Emerson Edom.
Yes.
After Emerson Edom, Emerson Poopum.
Yeah.
That's really the only reason why I remember Emerson Edom at this point. But I think that he did come out to Australia at one point in time and play in one of those Canada versus USA things.
Yeah, he was on one of the rosters. He was on. It wasn't the year where we had one good player, which was the year of Brent Burns. Brent Burns. It was basically Brent Burns versus Team USA.
That's it.
that was the whole draw that year, and we'll talk about hockey in Australia in a little bit too. We'll start off with some sad news, and we have to start off. It's actually kind of the biggest news in the last few days in hockey, is that the Calgary Flames assistant AGM Chris Snow has died at the age of 42 following a battle with ALS, again known in Australia better as motor neurone disease. Now, Snow served as director of hockey ops for Minnesota 2006 to 2010, joined the Flames in 2010, and was promoted in 2020 to assistant GM. This has been all over the socials. His wife's been really good at keeping everyone up to date with what's happening. And just, it's the way that they publicly faced the battle and publicly sort of gave a face to that. And again, to pull back the curtain a little bit, my wife works with people with motor neurone disease. So, I know what a horrible, horrible thing that is. And so anytime that people can bring awareness to that, and especially show their own journey and show their own battle is, useful and helpful for people.
Yeah, and just such an unfortunate thing at 42. That's young for an executive in the NHL, to be honest.
Yeah,
young obviously in life, but that's we're only a few years off that ourselves, and that's it's awful to think that that could be it.
Well, I mean, director of hockey ops in 2006, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like in Minnesota. That's insane. So the way he did that, it's just again, one of the things that is really cool is the way that he rose through. And one of the things the Flames have done well, and there's a lot of things that you can criticize the Flames for, but especially given the current general manager situation there, what they've seemed to have done very well is foster a culture of the people in the lower positions in that executive who have all risen up together. And it feels like they've just really, we joked around when they did their general manager search about promoting from within. As a long search until they found the guy who was in the back room. But a lot of this actually feels like they've just been preparing everyone in the organization to take steps up. And that's kind of good. You don't necessarily want to have a complete roster reset every time. So, but obviously, and like everyone in hockey has been, obviously talking about Chris Snow. His wife was talking about the fact that he's an organ donor as well. So that was all, again, some good came from that. But yeah, the other thing I was going through some of the social media posts. One of the things I liked was they posted a couple of weeks ago was they using AI and technology, they put together a voice box so that all of the clips of his audio from conversations and interviews and all of that went together so he could type and speak to his daughter in his voice.
That's really good.
It was really cool. So it wasn't like that a weirder sort of voice. It was his voice compiled. So that was really cool too. But obviously a very sad situation there in Calgary. There's no real way to transition out of those things. We talk about this all the time. You can't really do a solid transition. We're just going to do a quick switch.
Yeah.
And it's time to bring out Gary for one of the first times this year. We have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. Vancouver Canucks acquired Casey DeSmith from the Montreal Canadiens for Tanner Pearson and a 2025 third-round pick.
We talked about DeSmith when he went out in the Carlson trade, and there was talk at the time that Montreal were looking for somewhere to send him. They'd kind of guaranteed him they weren't going to run like 3 goalies into the season. They were going to try and move him somewhere that could use him. So obviously this is kind of where that ended up being. It's interesting which teams have kind of gotten themselves into a situation where they suddenly need a goalie in the recent past. I wonder if it had been like a few days later if we would have seen like Tampa or someone try and make us trade for him as well. But
I get the feeling that Tampa were absolutely kicking themselves, and that we've Tampa probably should have been a little bit more all over this. I'm surprised.
Yeah. Look, not that Casey DeSmith is any kind of world-beating goalie. I think he's more or less an average backup at this point in time.
But that's what you need.
NHL, but that's fine. When not to jump the gun too much because we're going to talk about Tampa a little bit later. But when their essentially starting goalie now is Jonas Johansson, who a beat writer once called the worst goalie he'd ever seen. That's maybe a step up, but look, we'll see what happens with all of that. They did mention specifically in some of the tweets about this trade directly after the third round pick was basically not so much a value thing, but to kind of offset like the difference in salary, considering DeSmith I think makes like 1.8 and Pearson makes something like 3.125. So
it was a really interesting. The Tanner Pearson part of that was really interesting too. There were a lot of people on the Vancouver side who were really upset and felt that Tanner Pearson had been done dirty, including Tanner Pearson, who seemed to very much think he'd been done dirty in this whole situation because the whole thing is coming back from injury and we're getting you back. We're getting you back. You're going to come back in. You're going to be great. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be great. You'll be back. Gets himself back into shape, ready to go, trade. And he wasn't particularly impressed.
Look, hopefully he'll get a little bit of opportunity there. I think that there's plenty of opportunity to be had on either team. Realistically, at this point in time, neither of them are the deepest teams in terms of quality and stuff. So maybe if Pearson has put it all together again, that'll be good for him. We'll see if that happens. But at this point,
can I just say,
I don't know.
The funny part at the moment, and it's preseason, so they're carrying people to try people out. But we talk about the fact that Montreal's roster, for example, is not even vaguely deep. But at the moment, they're carrying 26.
Yeah. Well,
they're over the roster by 3.
It's not so much that it's deep in terms of good quality. It's deep in terms of like just a shitload
Bodies.
of middle sixes. Yeah.
Like if you look at that roster,
Top to bottom middle sixes.
And again, this is our preview episode, so we're going to go through and break down how we think everyone's going to stand. And I don't think it will surprise many of you that we don't have the Habs very high at all. And when you look at the roster that they're going to ice, you will understand why. And I know there are a lot of people who, because it's the Habs, are very high on what they're doing. And I know that you just wait and see. They're going to surprise everybody. If they did anything this year, if they get surprising everybody, they're going to shock people, including themselves, I think. I don't think anyone in that room is expecting a hell of a lot from what they're doing this year. And they will come out and tell you otherwise publicly, but I don't think anyone in that room expects them to be good. There's a reason why, for example, Montreal has gone out and made sure that they've still got their first round pick. And that hasn't gone anywhere. They've got that one for a reason. So, but yeah, look, it's an interesting move. I think it's an interesting move as well for Vancouver. Obviously, the weird situation in Vancouver where they can't seem to help but add players and cap to a roster that's already in financial crap is remarkable. And the fact that they are adding, goaltending, all the chat around Thatcher Demko, it keeps coming up. They keep on insisting he's not tradable. They're not going to trade him. They don't want to move him. You keep hearing little leaks that seem to be coming from the Demko camp going, if something came up, we wouldn't necessarily say no. I don't know where all of this ends up, to be honest with you. I mean, I think there is an outside chance here that, and again, it's only an outside chance, but there is an outside chance that something happens early in the season. Coach extraordinaire Rick Tocchet decides that Casey DeSmith is his guy.
Yeah.
Which could happen.
Yeah.
And then if that happens, you've got a situation where you'll have a very unhappy Thatcher Demko begging to be moved. So,
well, I mean, this is the thing. Like we see with goalies at all time. But at any point they can go on a hot streak for a few months' time, and everything kind of comes together for them, and you don't know what happened. I can't see Thatcher Demko losing the net necessarily in Vancouver, but weirder things have happened if struggles occur.
I mean, it's happened before. They've benched him before.
Yeah.
All right, so signings. So Mikael Backlund gets the extension in Calgary, 2 years, $4.5 million, and gets the captaincy.
Yes.
The most important part of that conversation was, would he be paying for the team meal?
Yeah. I think that's that was kind of something we talked about in the off season. Was Backlund seemed like the obvious choice for captain. It was just that he didn't have an extension. I think that they did well not to sign him for longer than that, considering that he's already 35. Buying just at the age 36 and 37 years, or maybe even 37 and 38, because I don't think this contract kicks in until next year.
No, not next year.
Look, not his ideal, kind of years or whatever, but $4.5 million for what he does. If he can continue to be, 80% of what he has been the last couple of years, it's fine.
They're going to need somebody to fill that gap when they move Elias Lindholm. So
more or less, yeah.
That's going to be that again. We talked about this in the last podcast, but the Elias Lindholm situation is going to be probably the most fascinating situation coming out of Calgary at the moment. It's just watching what happens with Lindholm. I don't know. Again, that's another one where you don't really quite know where that's going to go, although I can't see him getting extended because I don't think they want to pay him what he's worth.
No.
So,
I mean, I do think that there's a good chance that his value, drops off significantly over the next few years too. So I would think that, even to the point of paying him even less than what he might be worth might not necessarily be the best idea in a couple of years' time too, and for the trajectory of the Flames. So I could see them not wanting to put themselves in that situation long term.
I'll be interested to see what happens, who decides they want to get him. It feels a bit like a deadline move that someone will make a deadline move for him.
For sure.
Also, we got Minnesota, who extended Marcus Foligno and Matt Zuccarello. The lizard goes Zook. So 4 years at $4 million for Foligno and 2 years at $4,125 for Zuccarello.
Yeah, I think both of those are pretty reasonable.
Look, I think they're perfectly reasonable contracts. You've also got the one thing you always have to remember with Minnesota is this is the year of the cap hell.
Yeah.
This is the year where they are paying the piper for buying out those contracts, and they're in massive financial crap. So like, I think the interesting part is they are in massive financial crap. But again, we're going to get to our predictions of who's going to finish where. And I think they're projected. I think both of us have them projected to have a good year. And it's largely because it's a solid roster, even with like the amount of, cap they've got and all of those issues they've got going on. Like, I think it's really interesting how that's going to go. Like the dead cap hit this year is 14 million.
Yeah, that's huge. Like,
it's 2 years. This year and next year, 14 million in dead cap.
That's like, that's like Conor McDavid and change.
Exactly.
You could have on your roster.
You can afford Conor McDavid, and you could go out and get yourself, a bodyguard. Hello Toronto, we're looking at you. And pay for bodyguards, and you'd still have money left over. So yeah. Again, they're not bad contracts in isolation with 14 million and change sitting on the books. Yeah,
the concern probably is age there. Like, Foligno just came off an injury. He's 32, so you're not buying his best years either. But for the kind of role that he plays, I don't know. I guess we'll see how his body holds up over the course of that deal. But 4 million is not the end of the.
You're buying Zuccarello going into 39.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the big thing for Zuccarello. Like, he kind of had this bounce back of a renaissance playing with Kaprizov, but how long he can keep doing that at his late 30s, I don't know. That's the big question.
So we still have players that are currently sitting out and not paid. Probably for me, the most interesting one of those is, what exactly is Anaheim doing with the Trevor Zegras money?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, pay the man.
I don't get it.
That's like, there are people that you play really hardball with, and then if you're Anaheim, there's Trevor Zegras.
Yeah.
Who you wheel the truck
up
to.
The only reason that people are coming to watch you this season.
Yeah, everyone's like, Trevor Zegras will be fantastic. Look, we're going to be absolutely terrible, but Trevor Zegras is going to be something. Well, we're not going to.
If I was going to watch an Anaheim Ducks game, pretty much Trevor Zegras is the only reason I'm going.
Yeah, if Zegras is not there, I don't understand that one. Shane Pinto is also unsigned, and Jamie Drysdale. So Zegras is confusing. I don't get what they're doing again, and it's not like Anaheim has a roster of people that are going to be, stars at the minute. They've got some good prospects, obviously, but like the roster next year, you've got, Alex Killorn is there. I forgot Alex Killorn is there.
Yeah, they sent Alex Killorn
on a lot of money.
A lot
of money. And a no trade. And a no trade.
The next 4 to 6 weeks.
Adam Henrique is still there. I think is still there. Jakob Silverberg is still there on the tail end of that contract that he signed and immediately fell off a cliff with.
The most uninteresting power play quarterback in the league, Cam Fowler.
Oh, well, that was, true. I mean, the really interesting part from it, the Silverberg one is Silverberg one's one of my favorite contracts in the league because literally the second he signed it, he stopped playing hockey. He was reasonable to pretty good. Yeah. And he was like, oh yeah, he might be worth that. That could be a pretty good deal if he keeps producing. And the second he signed the contract, his numbers disappeared. And it's like, I've got the deal now. I don't need to do anymore. Hockey is complete.
I'm done.
But like with everyone else there, like Leo Carlson might make this roster. Like this is the thing. They've got so little on the roster that Leo Carlson might make the roster coming out of camp. And there's a couple of players that look like they might actually, some of these teams look so bad that some of these players might make the roster out of camp. San Jose is looking at that, by the way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't expose anyone. I
think there'll be a lot of players that at least get the 9 games and get sent back, because why not? But look, I think, of those guys, Anaheim is the puzzling one. Shane Pinto is because Ottawa doesn't have any money left. But
that's the issue.
Yeah, but like literally no money left. So I don't know what they're going to do, but they'll work that out. But look, it is what it is. I imagine they'll get signed. I kind of imagine at this point in time, though, like, it feels like the Zegras thing isn't close. Well, we've got like a little bit over a week before the first game of the season. I just don't know if it's going to get done before then.
My other concern with that is the Anaheim attitude. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, I think that, you know, they probably also see it as like, this will help us tank. Like,
but I mean, I agree with that, because like he did get them more points. Like, think about it. Last year, he got them more points than they realistically needed. There were games that he went out there and like single-handedly stole and gave them too many points. But I kind of, I mean, the counter argument to that, and I'm thinking of this from again what the Sharks and Hasso Plattner would do, would be to complain about the fact that nobody's coming to watch the team.
Yeah.
And we would like some revenue, please. That would be really handy right now. We need some revenue to get us through this.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think they get it done. I'm just not sure if they get it done in the next week. Like, even if they do, like, he's probably not playing in the first game of the season. Like, he's probably going to take a week of, you know, training or whatever before he gets up to speed.
A bit more holiday. So, in news that shocked me, the NHL came to Australia. I heard nothing about it. I was surprised.
Certainly no one mentioned this at all.
I was surprised. So, okay, first of all, one of us got to go.
Yes.
One of us was stuck in another state.
Yeah.
So,
look, it honestly, I was surprised by how good a job that they did. We don't often get an opportunity to praise the NHL for doing something well, but all things considered, I think that they pulled this off pretty well. Like, they went to a lot more effort than they absolutely needed to. They went well beyond the minimum effort required for this. They put a lot of time into, you know, setting up, media connections and stuff. They had a whole bunch of situations where, you know, former players and so forth were coming out to Australia for announcements and stuff, even early on, like a few months back. They had, connections with the AFL and so forth. I know that they were there for the Collingwood game just beforehand, and they brought a bunch of players along. They gave them a bunch of merch. They did photo opportunities. They had the AFL trophy with the Stanley Cup, and they had a whole bunch of, kind of stuff going on with all that kind of stuff. Obviously the Stanley Cup was here. That was obviously not necessary, but it was a really cool, thing to be able to, get a picture with the cup. I got to meet Phil Pritchard, which was really awesome.
The Goodall Cup, if you wanted to see something far less important.
Yes, it was also side by side with the Good Old Cup. So they did a bit of crossover stuff with the AIHL, which was, well, technically, I think that they did crossover stuff with Ice Hockey Australia.
Ice Hockey is great. Remember, the AIHL does not own the Goodall Cup. It's on Ice Hockey Australia.
Yeah. So this is the thing, is I actually think that, like, from what I understand, like, Ice Hockey Australia was the kind of actual kind of connection that they were doing. So I know that they did stuff with, like, IHA's like coaching and refereeing team. And connections there.
My understanding was that the AIHL was zero part of it.
Yes, I don't think they were technically. I think they were more or less like, we're going to handle this. IHA's like, we're going to handle this.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah, they did do stuff, like they had things on the scoreboard and everything about the history of the AIHL and the teams that were in it, all that kind of stuff. Like, it wasn't like there was no advertising for the AIHL, but there wasn't any like implicit, connection between that kind of stuff. And I'll
probably upset a few people, but they're not the best at promoting things, the AIHL. No. And I say this as someone who's had involvement. They are not the best at that. So I'm probably glad that it was left to mainly the NHL. And the NHL did a very good job. I agree 100% from an outside perspective. And, I know for a fact that, because I spoke to them a few times, I know that everyone from PHNX Sports, who came out, Liam Merrill, who we spoke to on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, they were having an absolute blast in Melbourne.
I kept an eye out for Rob. I didn't spot her when I was there, but there was a lot of people there. There was a heap of stuff outside. They brought along a whole bunch of little games and things for people to play. They brought along a bunch of merch. All of the merch more or less sold out by Saturday. So I think they really kind of underestimated, how much they were going to sell and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like it's a pretty big success. And the whispers are that they may be back in a couple of years' time. I don't think there's anything confirmed about that, but there's been kind of some talk about it as if like this.
I have a feeling it may even be 12 months' time. I get the feeling that they want to be back really fast.
This is all, third-hand information, but the date that I heard was 2025. But this is not, anything official. I think this is probably just the reality that this takes a long time to plan.
Yeah, it does. And again, also, you've also got to work out what teams are going to come, and that's the other question is you've got to convince teams.
Honestly, as disappointed as I was to be,
I think it was the right call.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that they actually it was fine that beyond the LA and Arizona thing, we've had a lot of new Arizona fans. I knew of 3 Arizona fans before this, and we've had probably 30 people join the group over the last week or something saying that they're a new Arizona fan.
We've had the population of Mullet Arena 3 times over.
Yeah, people saw that Logan Cooley goal and went, sign me the fuck up. But the reality of them doing a preseason game rather than a regular season game, I was disappointed about that originally, but in a lot of ways I feel like that's maybe better for such a thing where they're going a 20+ hour flight to hear what it would have just been brutal to do during the middle of the regular season.
And the interesting part for me too was there were some people who were upset because they found out that, for example, Arizona was playing games in the US at the same time.
Yeah,
but Arizona brought the main team. They did.
Yeah,
they left the prospects in the States. The games that were happening for Arizona in the States were mostly prospects that aren't expected to make the lineup this year.
Yeah, almost.
The team they brought was the NHL roster.
Yeah, the NHL roster of the Kings and the Coyotes was here. Disappointingly for some people, I think Doughty and Kopitar didn't play on Sunday, which was a slight letdown. There was 2 or 3 people that probably won't be on the starting roster for each of those teams or whatever that probably be their kind of training players or whatever during the season that got to play games. And I understand that you've got to if everyone's going to fly out here, you want to give them a game. You want to, if you want to bring your 4 extra guys and you want to get them to play a game.
And you also probably don't want
to sit the veterans.
You also don't want to run Doughty and Doughty and Kopitar 2 nights back to back.
No, and it's absolutely unnecessary. But I felt for the Kings fans that came along only to Sunday and didn't get to see those guys. But that's a relatively small niggle in terms of the entire thing. I thought it was a incredible thing that they managed to pull off.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I mean from the on ice perspective, apart from the mini hiccup that happened on the Friday where the ice wasn't quite ready to go. They seem to get that underhand.
I mean, it didn't look amazing overall, in terms of the bounciness and all that kind of stuff.
I messaged with Blair Morrell when the Coyotes training got cancelled, and I messaged her and I went, "Well, welcome to Australian ice. This is just what you see at any rink." But it was. I thought that overall, what they ended up putting on on TV was great in terms of seeing it was good. Having it on,
I don't know why the lighting was so bad.
That was the question. The point I was going to raise was the lighting needs to be improved next time because the lighting was terrible.
But the thing is that they had good lighting, so they put the highlights on during the warm ups, basically, during the thing where they did the anthem and they did all of that. Was it maybe the ice?
Was it maybe the ice?
It might be that they didn't want to melt the ice or something. So they had it on for about 10 minutes at the start. And I'm like, oh, this looks really good. All of a sudden, it's not so dark or whatever. And then once they started doing the answers, they turned all the lights off and they kind of stayed dim. They just, they had the full stadium lighting that you would see on a regular broadcast. They just weren't using it.
It was Habs versus Nordiques in 1982.
Yeah. Everything looked a little bit grainy and.
But apart from that, it was good to have it on Channel 9. Obviously not on the main channel, but what is on? Yeah, the lights generating a heat is sort of what we've sort of put forward.
I suspect that probably was what it was. Yeah.
But look, I think it was overall, and everybody was talking about the Logan Cooley highlight, which was just outstanding, and it was hockey world viral, not just Australian. Oh my god!
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I went to the other day and I didn't get to see the Cooley goal in person. There were a lot of people doing some great shit. Honestly, it was exciting. Anytime he got the puck, it was fun just watching him try to do something with it.
There were also a lot of people who were in podcasts and stuff like that who were denigrating the idea of the Australia games beforehand. Who after the games happened seemed to change their tune when they heard from people who were here and were like, no, they actually went really well. They've got to do that again. So I know that like Friedman and Merrick were pretty high on it, and a couple of others. So again, I think all the things are sort of pointing in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Jojo. The lighting was definitely fine in person. Like, there wasn't an issue with it in person. It was just that I watched the Saturday game on TV and I went like, why does this look like it was filmed on a GoPro? Like, what's going on?
I'm incredibly glad for everyone in the group that got to go. It was really good to see everybody having their photo taken with the Stanley Cup. So many people cuddling the damn thing. I wouldn't have done that. But,
I lined up for it on the Sunday, and thankfully I didn't get there any later because they packed it up like 15 minutes after I was there. But they were kind of rushing us through at that point in time, and I think that if I had a little bit more time with it, I might have taken my time, tried to find all of the the Penguins things on there or whatever. I got to see the 92 thing and stuff, but I'm like, oh, do I it's that weird thing. I'm like, obviously I'm never gonna play, I'm never gonna win the Stanley Cup. I'm like, do I touch it? Do I there's this kind of like, I'm like, in the end, I kind of just went like, no, I don't want to add like more fingerprints to this that they have to I don't need to touch.
I mean, you could have. You could have. I saw the photo. You and Phil are best friends now.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like we were, you were right there with it. You could absolutely have, touched it away.
Was Phil Pritchard the biggest superstar? It feels like Phil Pritchard was the biggest superstar.
For the people that knew who he was, yes. So he wasn't like actively getting people in with it. At least when I was there, like he was kind of standing off to the side watching from a distance, and they had like volunteers that were taking, would take your phone and get a picture for you and stuff. And he was kind of just watching from a distance, and clearly like not everyone knew who he was. He had like the badge that said he was an NHL employee and his name was Phil and stuff, but like a friend of mine was getting a picture with him, and I'm like, oh, do you mind being get a picture and stuff at the same time and say hi and stuff? But there weren't a lot of other people going over to him. I can't imagine that most people are big enough nerds to know who he is.
I would have been far too excited meeting Phil. Anyway, the stories that
it was great.
The stories that man has. Anyway, before we move into our preview, we have one more thing we need to update, which was the focus of the last podcast.
Yes.
Mike Babcock has resigned as the coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Like literally like 2 days after we recorded.
Replaced by Pascal Vincent, who apparently internally everyone's like, thank God. But so very much respected. Everyone was quite happy with that decision. Now, we talked about the Babcock thing. And in that last podcast, I said, look, he's probably done a lot worse. He's probably going to do a lot worse. I don't know if this is necessarily, by the way we've heard the story, if this is necessarily a firing offense. Cut to a couple of days later, where it comes out that he had done what they said with, the captain and some of the veteran players, and that had been a thing. But he then had done the same thing with rookies and younger players, not anywhere near the practice venue, and it wasn't a case of a 5-second thing. It was 15 minutes worth of going through their phones, and they felt that they couldn't refuse. And the man is done. He is absolutely done in hockey. Everybody, even nothing brings together the old hockey heads and the modern hockey people and all these people who have different political beliefs. Nothing brings these people together. But every single person, to a man, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, on the eye test versus stats spectrum, every single person looked at it and went, "You're an idiot. You're done."
It's funny because obviously the anti-Babcock thing was led by the Barstool group, which are
who would back him.
Which are usually maybe the people that would like hold up against like rookies complaining about something or whatever. So it's interesting in that regard that that there was just no in group that was excited for Babcock. And look, we talked about it on the last pod, and we were we were kind of having to couch our opinions at that point in time because it had just come out, and it was really in the like 48 hours, I think, before we recorded or whatever, like things were still developing. It was still an investigation. And we kind of had to be like, look, at this point in time, this is what we're basing our opinions on, that it sounds like from what's come out publicly that, maybe it was, it came across badly, but it wasn't so bad.
It sounds like he's been an idiot, but it doesn't sound like he's
it was intentionally malicious or whatever. And then, and then obviously it develops and into being like, oh, actually some of it was pretty bad. You're like, oh, okay, well, look, I'm not shocked. I wish I knew about that earlier when I gave my opinion on it, but...
And it's legitimately the definition of the meme of the worst person that just made a good point.
Yeah.
But the other interesting part about that whole situation too is, and this is something they did say, the Chicklets guys did talk about, which was they felt really bad that, the leadership group of the Columbus Blue Jackets were wheeled out to defend Mike Babcock.
Yeah.
Like, why did you hang them out to dry? Like, you've basically made it so within that locker room now, the veterans who are the leadership group look stupid.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, clearly they got a different experience to some of the other guys, and they, had to go to bat for him. This guy that they just barely met, and with the view that they had to go out and defend him, and now have basically been proven like, oh hey, yeah, you just had to defend someone who did something awful to some of your teammates. And it's like, oh, that's an awkward way to start the season.
And the other interesting thing is that everyone in hockey seems to agree that accidentally now Columbus have made the right hire. Because Pascal Vincent, they said, is very well regarded. There are lots of people who are like, you probably should have got the coaching job initially. They said it's sort of, the hockey will be not too different from Babcock, but probably a little bit more different. So the players will fit that style, but he's also probably a little bit more advanced in terms of more modern than Babcock's views. So you might get a little bit better hockey in Columbus. They need it. So
well, I mean, now they're going to be paying two coaches to not coach for them for the next little while. So that's not going to be great.
So with that, it's season preview time, folks.
Yes,
this is always everybody's favorite time of the year. Now, we will go through at the end and go through and talk about the responses we got, because I asked people to put their responses to the questions in the group. And we didn't give everyone the full run that we give because it's way too long. But we got the gist of it and gave everyone the gist of
the important stuff.
All the important stuff. So what we're going to do is, and this year I've got it in graphic form. So with that in mind, we're going to start with our predictions of award winners. So we're going to start with the award winners. So we'll go through them one by one. So the Hart and the Lindsay, we haven't differed at all. Connor McDavid.
I just think it's so hard to bet against Connor McDavid. Like, when he's putting up, close to 150 points a season, and the next closest person is breaking 100, 110 or whatever. It's just so difficult not to pick him in a.
The other problem is, though, and this is we talk about it every year, and it comes up every year. The way these awards are defined makes it impossible for anyone else to win it.
Yeah.
Because if someone else wins it, everyone goes, you're wrong. But you could have had the best season, but the most valuable player to their team.
Yeah, I think that the Hart is absolutely more that than the Lindsay. Like, the Lindsay is very traditionally, it's voted on by the players, and it's very traditionally given to the player that everyone knows is the best. Like, it went to Crosby for a really long time, and it's gone to McDavid almost every year since he's been in the league, and for good reason. And it's just so difficult to, someone has to have, an incredible season, and McDavid probably has to get hurt for like 20 games for him to not win it. That's pretty much the bar at this point in time.
And that's what's happened when he hasn't won it previously. Or Matthews had his massive season and deserved it quite easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely possible for someone else to win it. It's just, it's really
I don't like having
the field.
I don't see my thing is, I'm getting sick and tired of everyone having a fight. I personally don't believe that Connor McDavid should be a lock for the Hart every year. I think it should go to the person who has clearly demonstrated they are the most valuable to their team. You can argue that for McDavid on the basis of, if you took McDavid out of Edmonton, they'd probably be terrible. But even with Draisaitl there, they'd probably be terrible. So
it's hard because you could always argue that a goalie, on most teams is that, and generally goalies don't win it. So it's there were a
couple of players I came close to putting down there, and we'll get to those in a minute. But I think it's McDavid. The Vezina. So the Vezina is where we first differ. Now, the Vezina was hard. I still think that the best goalie in the league is Igor Shesterkin. I don't trust the Rangers. I do not trust the Rangers. And it sounds weird, especially when you look down at who I gave the Norris to. But I just feel like that roster is badly constructed overall. And I think that you are asking probably two players in Fox and Shesterkin to do everything. Yeah. And I just don't think it's reasonable.
Well, I think that's it for me. I think that's why I went with Ottinger, because I looked at like the top 5-6 goalies in the league. You're looking at like Vasilevsky, who's hurt, so that probably takes him out of the running because he's out for like a couple of months. You got Ottinger, you got Shesterkin, you got Sorokin, Hellebuck, Saros. That's basically like your top echelon of goalies or whatever. Nashville's awful, Winnipeg's awful, New York is suspect, and Tampa, is Vasilevsky's injured. So that kind of leaves me with like, well, Ottinger's on a good team that should put up good results, even if all of those other guys were just as good as him. He's probably going to get better counting stats, and that's generally who it goes to. that's pretty much the arithmetic of my vote.
So my vote for Saros is based on the idea that when we get to our predictions of where people are going to finish, I've got Nashville scraping a playoff spot. They're not great, but I think it's going to be UC Saros absolutely carrying them into the playoffs. And if UC Saros carries Nashville into the playoffs, he wins the Vezina.
Yeah.
That's simple. They're not good. They're not a good team. But again,
no, you're correct. Absolutely, there's a pathway to that.
Yeah. Saros has been, in the last couple of years, around the Vezina voting. He's been fairly high up in the Vezina voting. I think last year was 4th or 5th. It was somewhere around there. He's always consistently in that top 5. I think that, again, that's not a good team. If they get anywhere near a playoff, that's where think about the Bobrovsky year. Right? That team was far better than expected. Have a Vezina.
That often happens. I want to just, before we move off that real quickly, I want to talk about some of the public votes for this.
Oh yeah, this is fun
because I think that most of the people that I just listed in that kind of top echelon of goalies were, have been kind of voted for, which, absolutely makes sense. I can see, any of them realistically could. The one that's fun that stands out to me is Jordan Binnington, who I am not even convinced will be the starting goalie on St. Louis by the end of the year.
I'm not convinced he survives there. The other one that was really interesting, and I very nearly found a pathway to give him the Vezina nod, was Samsonov.
Yeah.
And my rationale behind that was that, and if you're watching us on video, we'll get to it, but I've got Toronto for the President's Trophy. That's not necessarily because I think they're going to be brilliant. We'll talk about why in a moment. But if they go out and do that, I can see a pathway where they go, well, Samsonov, look at him. So I think some of the votes, like everyone pretty much put down Ottinger, Hellebuck, Sorokin, Saros was there. But Samsonov and Binnington stood out, and Binnington really stands out for me. That's a fascinating decision.
That's an interesting one. I'm curious. Who
I'd like to know why.
Yeah, I'm curious the logic behind that, because he's just been not good in the NHL for the last few years. Very subpar as a starting goalie.
He's been focused on everything other than stopping a puck.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's entirely possible for, he could put together an insane run like when the Blues won the Cup, but I just,
No, that's it.
I don't see it happening. I think there's a more chance that Joel Hofer is the starting goalie on St. Louis at the end of the year than Binnington winning the Vezina.
So let's make JoJo happy that Connor Bedard's winning the Calder. And look, I really wanted to put someone other than Connor Bedard. And there are a lot of people who have thought about this. Like in the media, you're seeing a lot of people not predicting Connor Bedard for the Calder. I think it's trying to be the hipster pick personally.
I think it is a bit, realistically.
I mean, Logan Cooley's getting a lot of love, and I think Cooley will poll pretty well because I think he's going to get a lot of game time because Arizona.
But I think that if you're going that path, that this for me is why Cooley wasn't in my top 3, because if you're going that path of he's going to get a lot of game time on a bad team, then Bedard and Fantilli I think have hit that over him, because Fantilli will be the top center as well on Columbus. Bedard will be the top center on Chicago, and Cooley is behind that top line in Arizona. He's not getting on that top line with Kalla and Schmaltz, and
he's not getting on the.
Payton.
He's not getting on the top line. That's part of the reason why I was okay with putting him in the 3 is because I feel like the shielded minutes will actually help him a little bit. In terms of his numbers will probably look a lot better than that top line's just because he won't be on the ice as often.
But well, this is the thing I think all four of those guys will have a great season.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think Connor Bedard is just going to be too good. And as we've seen in the preseason, that's coming through right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, he hasn't scored in a bunch of the highlight reel goals or whatever, but it's coming. Like, let's be honest here. Like,
I mean, he got one today.
Yeah, no one else is doing better than him. And look, they're gonna start coming together. Even if he puts together like a 70-point season, I think that he outpaces those other guys, and that's probably all he needs. So for me, the reason I put Devon Levi as second was because I think that you're looking at with like Bedard, Cooley, Fantilli, you're looking at like three opposing centers, and I just don't see how Fantilli and Cooley outbattle Bedard for that. But Devon Levi has a different factor in that he will probably be the starting goalie for Buffalo unless something really goes bad. So there's a different element of that. Like if I don't see a pathway where someone does more than Bedard at the center position, but to be to put up let's say 50 starts for Buffalo as a starting goalie on a team that is probably going to be pretty good. I think that's a different angle that you can come at it from, and you could absolutely make arguments that at his age, being the starting goaltender and having that responsibility is a huge factor.
I think you're 100% right. I just feel like the writers forget the goalie as a position.
Definitely, it's definitely possible. I mean, not a lot of goalies win the Calder.
That's my only issue. Is that I think that I agree with you. I agree with every part of your logic. I just feel like they forget that a goalie is a player.
Well, I mean, that's for me why he doesn't win it. But I think that he ends up in the top three.
Right, the Art Ross. There's no conversation. It's Connor McDavid, and that's fair. The Rocket Richard is interesting because this is really fascinating. We've both gone McDavid for the Art Ross. But neither of us have gone McDavid for the Rocket Richard.
I mean, generally McDavid puts up a little bit more assists than he does at goals. Generally,
and also neither of us went Draisaitl.
Usually in his team, even Draisaitl would have like maybe a few more goals than McDavid, just in terms of the way their power play setup and stuff works. But my logic for this was that I think that they're going to rely really heavily in Boston on Pasternak this year with with the personnel that they've lost, with the depth that they've lost. He's probably going to be getting played like 25 minutes a night, just trying to stay in games. In that regard, I think that he has like just that little bit more ice time potential to do it. I think that there'll be a bunch of guys that are just around that 50-something goal mark, and it could be any of them. But I had to pick one, and I feel like he's going to get leaned on more than all the other guys who will maybe cannibalize each other's points a little bit.
I agree with you, except I feel like this is the season where he gets hurt because they're leaning on him so much.
The problem is that every other season of the past 5 years has been the season that Matthews gets hurt. So I didn't want to gamble on this is the season that Matthews doesn't get hurt. See,
I think that Matthews is going to have.
I think if Matthews plays 82 games, he wins it every year, but he just never fucking plays 82 games.
This is the thing, is that I kind of feel like this might be the year where he does, or gets at least.
It'll happen at some point.
I think Matthews plays at least 78.
Okay, he played one season at 80 where he played all 82 games, and it was his first season in the league.
Yeah, that was the thing. When he won the Rocket, he didn't play 82.
So
that was the scoring pace he was on. It was ridiculous.
Well, and this is the thing. Like he scored 60 goals in 73 games 2 years ago.
This is the thing.
He could have put up like 65 or whatever in that year if he played full 82.
My other bit of logic around Matthews for the Rocket is, and we're going to talk about it when we get to it, the Atlantic. It's an interesting time in the Atlantic. It's not what we're used to, but we'll come to that in a moment. We won't get there just yet. Just quickly in the what the people selected. The Art Ross, we had McDavid, Connor McDavid, and McJesus. And for the Rocket, we had an interesting spray. So we had McDavid, we had two for Draisaitl, we had one for Matthews, we had one for Pasternak. Then we had Alex Ovechkin, which I think even Ovechkin would go optimistic.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the other one,
I'm not so sure that Obi gets over 40 this year, to be honest.
and the other one was Jack Hughes. I'm assuming it's Jack.
Yeah,
It was
probably.
Jack Hughes.
Hopefully.
I hope so.
I mean,
Quinn's like, what?
If Quinn gets like 60 goals this year, I'm real fucking impressed. But
I
yeah.
think Hughes will have a good year, but I don't think he's getting close to the Rocket.
I think that the problem for me with New Jersey, as much as I really like that team,
they score by committee.
I'll talk about that soon. Yeah, absolutely. They are. I feel the deepest forward team in the league this year, and I just don't see him getting the bulk of ice time that allows him to do that kind of thing.
No, they've got they kill you by 1,000 cuts. There's not watch out for this.
They have 3 lines that are close to as good as each other.
Yeah, exactly. The Norris. Now, my logic again is that I genuinely just believe that Adam Fox is the best defenseman in the NHL. And I think that, like, last year, I thought, even though I obviously had a very strong leaning as to where I wanted the Norris to go, and it went there, Adam Fox is the best defenseman in the NHL, and I think he wins the Norris. However, you have gone with Rasmus, not Rasmus Dahlin, no.
Yeah. I decided to go a little bit bold with this one. So I was.
I don't think you're too bold.
No, I don't think it's Super Bowl, but like I think that for me, I had to look at again like that top batch of defensemen, and I could have gone a safe pick and just said like Makar or someone like that. I wasn't gonna pick someone like Erik Karlsson as going back to back or anything like that,
or Seth Jones coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, Yossi won it a couple of years back, which means it's probably unlikely that he's going to do it again, and that team's going to stink. But like I looked at that like echelon of defensemen, and Darling had this huge breakout last year. His team is kind of hitting its stride. He seems to be kind of hitting that age curve of hitting his stride and so forth. And I don't know. I think that there's a potential there for everything kind of just to come together at the same time, him to put up 70 to 80 points and, on a good team, and, everything to kind of hit a stride for Buffalo in a weak Atlantic. I just kind of, I don't know. I kind of saw the picture coming together, and I went, I'm going to take a swing on Darling.
No, that's a good call. I think we both are in the same sort of camp in terms of being quite bullish on where Buffalo are going. So that makes perfect sense to me. I have no argument with that whatsoever. The Jack Adams, I've gone for Peter DeBoer.
I think we missed the Selkie there.
Oh, Mr. Selkie, sorry. Mana, because someone else has to win it.
Well, I mean, I like that logic. It's so rare that a winger wins the Selkie.
I also feel like for me, my argument really around Mana for the Selkie is, again, I think Toronto are going to have a good regular season, and I think Mitch Marner probably starts getting a lot of love from the media because now they no longer have to, criticize him because he's a Kyle Dubas person. They can just pretend that a real hockey guy loves him instead, and therefore they can stop pretending that they hate him. And so I think he wins the Selkie.
So for me, I went with Nico Hischier just because I feel like, this is the thing. Like, I feel like he's kind of starting to get to that point where he's going to be due for the next few years. Like, Barkov was that guy for a little while where it was like, he's the underrated guy, he's due, and then eventually he wins it and all this. I just kind of feel like Hischier is coming into that period where, he's going to be on a really solid team. He's going to, all come together. He's going to put together a point per game, and he's going to have really good defensive stats, and they're going to point to him and say, this is the culmination of everything for Nico Hischier, and this is him coming together. Like I just rather than going a safer pick, especially now that there's no Bergeron this year.
Well, that's the thing; it's open.
Yeah.
I think Hischier was second in voting last year, and Marner was third in voting last year. So
let me look. It makes sense.
Yeah, Jack Adams. I've gone with Peter DeBoer. It's the second year, or it's the second full year of DeBoer hockey in Dallas, and they'll be good in the regular season. It's usually his last year of being good, so he'll win the Jack Adams. I'll say he's done an amazing coaching job with that team. Ready for him to get fired in 12 months' time because that's what happens with Jack Adams. So I also, that's why I've gone with Peter DeBoer. I think
that makes a whole bunch of sense.
It's his timeline.
The Stars were definitely an option for me for that. Some of my picks kind of go a little bit hand in hand, because I mentioned Devin Levi earlier as like having like a good season, and Buffalo's all coming together and being a good team and so forth. Like there seems like there's like a little bit of a fairy tale story to potentially tell with Buffalo if it all goes well, even if they just make the playoffs and don't go deep or anything like that. I think that there's going to be people that look at that with a goalie that puts up good numbers and a team that's finally put it all together and everything's going for them. And I picked Don Granato for the Sabres just because I think that's if nothing else, the Jack Adams voters love a storyline.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like, as I said, my Saros for There's No One. It's the storyline that you're voting for. Along those lines, the Jim Gregory General Manager of the Year, we both went Kyle Dubas. I feel like you're going to get a storyline of, first of all, I think Pittsburgh will have a bit of a bounce back. Secondly, I think you've got a general manager who is determined to make Toronto look stupid. And I feel like he's going to be praised by the end of the year for giving Sidney Crosby pieces at the end of his career to extend his opportunity of winning before he retires.
Yeah, I think that there's a good narrative for it, and I think this is ironically, this is one of those weird. I'm fairly sure that the GM of the Year award is voted on like halfway through
after the first round,
which is super fucking dumb. But I think that. I think that it all kind of lines up for the big swings that Dubas has made coming in and the mark that he's already made on the Penguins and so forth. Like, I can't see another more visible GM option at this point in time with someone who's come in and been bold and done things. And so I think if they kind of have a little bit of a resurgence and a good year, it's I don't see at this point in time another contender with it. Apart from you can really kind of go two ways with the GM of the Year. It's either a team that finally all comes together after someone's long, hard work. And then you could probably point to somewhere like, Buffalo or New Jersey or someone as a team that's in that kind of capacity, or someone who made a couple of big moves, and that's usually what happens. I'm pretty sure that Jim Rutherford won in the year that did the big swing for Phil Kessel and Nick Menino and all that kind of stuff. Like this feels like that kind of move and that kind of award.
And so, interestingly enough, then we get to the President's Trophy. I've gone Toronto.
Yeah.
That is not me having overwhelming faith like I do every year that Toronto are going to pull it together. That is me saying that the Atlantic is terrible.
Yeah.
They are built for the regular season. I think they are going to do what they always do in the regular season. They are going to just get more points because they're playing in a really soft division. And I think that they'll probably end up, I think whoever ends up winning that division probably ends up winning it with a lot of extra points because the games are just going to be terrible. And I think Toronto's probably the team that capitalizes on that because the top of the roster and the nuts and bolts of that roster haven't shifted, whereas on every other one of those teams, the nuts and bolts of the roster have changed.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right, and I had the same thought when I was trying to work it out, and I very much considered going Toronto for the same reason. I didn't love some of their moves. I
think their moves are terrible, but I think that's
not that they were all bad. I think that overall they'll still be a good team. I don't know. I just had that tiny little bit of doubt, and maybe there was just a little bit of me just not wanting to, after all of that, pick them as the winner. But I think that the logic absolutely makes sense in a really weak Atlantic division this season, that absolutely they could run away with it.
Don't get me wrong, the media will overreact to the idea and say that this is all because of Ryan Reeves. We know
absolutely. Yeah. And I think a little bit mentally, I just didn't want that to happen. I didn't want them to succeed and people to point at it and kind of go, "Oh, see, this is what happens when you don't have Dubas and you make these moves and you bring in Ryan Reeves and you bring in
Wait till I get to the rest of my predictions.
Wait till I get to like Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi.
Wait till I get to the rest of my predictions. But let's face it, it's not about the regular season for me.
No, it's not. It's funny, but so look, I think I've made a slightly dicey pick in that regard. That I feel like New Jersey are the kind of best team on paper that I can see currently, and I just kind of went, Despite how much the Metro is going to cannibalize each other, I kind of just took a swing and went with them, but I could absolutely see them not winning it just because of how strong the Metro is.
I mean, so far, you've taken more swings probably than I have, which is unusual
Yeah.
for us. Moving on. So let's go into now looking at where we think things are going. So let's start with the Metro. Now, one of the things you're going to see is, and we didn't look at these each before we did them.
No.
We didn't talk about them. We've pretty much got a top four and a bottom four in the exact same team.
Yeah, we're quite close with these. I thought that you would have Pittsburgh and the Rangers the other way around.
No, I don't believe in the Rangers.
Yeah, well, this is the thing for me. Like, I almost did, and I think that most popular models have, Carolina, New Jersey, Rangers as like the top three, and Pittsburgh as the wild card.
I think
I can absolutely see happening.
I think the Rangers are Igor Shesterkin protected from being fifth. Yeah. But I don't think they're good enough to be in the top three.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like there was a little bit of unknown there for me as well. It was a toss up between New Jersey and Carolina. I think they're both really good teams, and that could go either way. But it was really then just a pick about which one makes it into third, and which one is the wild card. And even last year, when the Penguins were significantly worse in terms of their depth and so forth, there was a point in time up until about 80% through the season where Pittsburgh and New York were like neck and neck, and Pittsburgh just kind of tailed off, and New York kept going. And that was kind of the difference in points that ended up there where they kind of made it through. And I think that in a lot of ways, New York kind of got worse or as the same, and Pittsburgh got a little bit better. And that's kind of where but I could see that only being a couple of points between the two of them.
Interestingly enough, when we asked who would win the Metro, only two teams were picked. It was either New Jersey or Carolina. A majority went for New Jersey, but they're the two teams. For me, the interesting bit there is actually the fact that, first of all, we both got Philadelphia absolutely so marvelous. But the Washington and Columbus flip is an interesting one too. I still think that Ovi will score enough to just put them ahead of Columbus, but I don't think Columbus are going to be horrendous. Even though I've got them at 7, I don't think they'll be horrendous.
Well, I mean, that's why I put them over Washington, because I think that at this point in time, I think there's actually a little bit more there in terms of stuff to be excited about in Columbus than there is in Washington. I feel like Washington at this point in time are 3 kids in a trench coat trying to get over the goal record.
They are.
Like, it's like, that you look at the depth in their lineup, and there's just no one there realistically. Like, it just drops off real quickly.
Columbus have a lot to look forward to, and they've got some exciting pieces. And if it works, they could find themselves like, the heady heights of that mid pack of the Metro. The other thing I want to make really, really plain with this is that I don't think the bottom teams in the Metro are going to be the bottom teams in the East. I want to make that plain.
So to put it in context, I had the Rangers still making the playoffs in this top basically. Yeah, so I have like 4 teams making it out of the Metro, cutting off at the Rangers, I think that it's going to be pretty close in that 3rd and 4th spot. But really, like the 2 juggernauts of this division are New Jersey and Carolina. And there's a couple of almost contenders kind of thing in Pittsburgh and the Rangers.
And the Islanders will sit wherever Sorokin is, whatever's happening there, and that's kind of it. Moving on to the Atlantic, which I know a lot of people are waiting for. All right, Toronto. We both have Toronto as first, and that, again, is not me having overwhelming faith in Toronto. More the key pieces that Dubas put in place are there, and they're not going anywhere. They've added those other pieces. To be blunt, I don't think for the regular season it matters who the hell you put on the 3rd and 4th line in Toronto. I don't think it matters. No. I think it's all about those first 2 lines, and it's just if the Matthews and Marner and Tavares, if they're all firing, you're fine. And Austin Matthews can probably score you out of any situation. Tavares last year had a sneaky, really good year. He was sneakily very good. Marner is Marner. Nylander, again, that'll be the interesting situation going through this season, is what's going to happen there. I feel like they're probably just going to let the contract wind down and see where they go. But
yeah, I mean, look, everything they had good going for them previously is still there, and they're a juggernaut of a regular season team. And I don't see why that'll change.
So the funniest part for me
yeah,
is if you look at the way I've placed my divisions, I've put Toronto finally at the top, but I've made them play Tampa in round one.
So yeah, of course. So the interesting thing, I guess the big question and the difference between our things really is just Tampa and Florida, and I think both of them are a big question mark because of injuries, and that's just really just a matter of how it plays out. I've probably really kind of overestimated how well Tampa is going to deal with the Vasilevsky injury, because I think that, people have been saying for a long time, like, they're one Vasilevsky injury away from being terrible. And I think that's absolutely a possibility. I just don't know if it's going to matter that much in this division. Like, I think that they could absolutely get like a week, couple of weeks or a good, hot couple of weeks or whatever, and just kind of come out 500 in the first month or two, and then just, pour it on and still be fine. I think that's absolutely possible for them. And it's something that they've done plenty of times where they've kind of just started out shaky and then just turned it around and been like totally fine the rest of the season. I don't know. I'm just skeptical that this is going to sink them. I'm skeptical that they can't just get average goaltending and be like average or just above average for a couple of months and then be fine by the end of the year. Florida, for me, I think is the more kind of questionable one, because they're just so fucked up by the playoff run that they've just been on. Like, there are so many guys there that are injured, so many guys that are coming off, surgery and are just having such like a difficult time kind of getting back up to game speed and so forth. I just, they barely made the playoffs last year. I just can't see them getting an extra 20 points or whatever this year to get into like second in the Atlantic. Like, they were like 92 points last year.
We will talk about it. We'll talk about it, obviously, when we get to our predictions later on down the line for what's going to happen in the finals. I can only see legitimately, and I'm going to get absolutely mocked in the group for this, and I don't care. There is only one team I can see in this actually having a decent playoff run, and it's the Buffalo Sabres. I genuinely believe that is the only team capable of a decent playoff run out of all of these teams. I think Tampa can have one great series, and then they'll probably collapse in a heap. I think Florida are not good, but I think in the regular season they can just combine points. We all know Toronto. We all know, and every year when we come to these predictions, I give Toronto a deep run, and I say I'm not going to do it, and I do it. We'll get there in a minute, but I think the only team actually in this division that could actually have a decent run is Buffalo, just because I feel like they're built in a way that's not reliant on one key element being brilliant.
Look, I like Buffalo, but I don't know if they have the experience to go on a deep run. Realistically, I feel like if they make the playoffs and they have a puncher's chance in the first round, they'll consider that a success. I do think that. I guess I'll talk about the Patrick Kane thing a little bit later, because I do have a prediction about that. But I think there's a decent chance that they get him, and I'll talk about what I feel about that in a little bit.
I will, because I don't have a prediction. I will say straight up, I don't think we know vaguely where Patrick Kane is going until end of December is when he'll start really making noises about that.
Well, there's rumors that he's going to come back earlier than that, but I don't think there's any rush for him. No. I think it's probably better if he plays less and rehabs.
Sits back, waits and watches and sees what the league is doing. Let the league play out in front of you before you do it.
Yeah, but in terms of the rest of the division there, I think we're pretty close with the majority of those. We obviously see a pretty massive drop off for Boston, considering that they're the President's Trophy, winners from last year.
Boston are terrible. That roster's horrible.
But like, obviously, look at the roster. Like, they lost so much. Like, I don't think they're going to be as bad as they're not going to be a bottom feeder. I think that there's still too much there for them to be absolutely awful.
It's a bit like what I said about the Rangers, where, the Rangers have a Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox floor.
Yeah.
Boston have a David Pastrnak is scoring goals floor.
Yeah.
And it's kind of there.
Yeah, I mean, look, they still have a reasonably decent, like, top power play in terms of quality and stuff. There, they have good goaltending. They have they have some pieces there. They just don't have the center depth. They don't have everything that they need to put together like a significantly contending season or anything. But look, I think that they're going to be okay, but there's too much there for them to completely bottom out and be worse than some of these other teams.
I mean, the other interesting part there too is as I think Michael commented in the comments there about Pastor has to stop turning it over. That's not what Pasternak's there for this year. Pasternak is purely he is purely there to put the puck in the net. There is not going to be a care about how much his possession stats look. There's not going to be any complaint about it. It's going to be a little bit like Ovechkin. Nobody looks at Ovechkin and looks at his defensive numbers. You don't look at, but how does Ovechkin go rushing back on the breakaway? Nobody's looking at those stats.
Literally, Ovechkin, Patrick Kane, all of these kind of guys, some of the worst defenders in the league.
Timmy Panarin, terrible.
At their entire career, always have been some of the worst defenders in the league. Does not fucking matter.
No, because their job is to put the puck in the net, and Pasternak's only job this year is somebody needs to score in Boston. The question mark for me this year is Brad Marchand, because not just because he's now captain, all that kind of stuff, but like traditionally his numbers have kind of dropped off away from Bergeron. I think that he's still a good player in his own right, but I don't know if there's enough there for him to, especially if they want to try and break him up away from Pasternak, which they've done traditionally. I'm just not sure that they can do that. I don't know if either of them can just carry a line on their own anymore. I'm not sure if Marchand, I think that if Marchand plays away from Pasternak, he's probably not going to have a great year. I kind of also feel like Marchand's going to have an interesting season in terms of what the captaincy means for him on ice, in terms of how does Brad Marchand, the player, change as a captain? I mean, I feel like not that they want him to, but I feel like he will. And I feel like he'll try to adjust a little bit. And again, depends on how the game goes as well. I think to be honest, and we've talked about this, and I know that the comments came in about turning it over. It puts pressure on defense and Ullmark and Swayman. That's kind of the point. That's kind of why we don't think that Boston are going to be very good this year, is that they're going to turn the puck over a lot because they don't necessarily have the depth and stability that they would have had previously down the roster. And also, I think Ullmark and Swayman last year in the playoffs, that became a problem that they were able to hide for the entirety of the season in terms of workload. And I'm not convinced that Ullmark's anywhere near as good this year. I'm not convinced of that at all.
I mean,
there's not a lot in front of him.
It's probably not a bold prediction to say that their goaltending is probably not going to be league leading again.
There's not as much in front of them to shield them. And Boston's cap doesn't give them the situation to get out of it. So, that's part of, for all of the Boston fans who were very much riding that whole Pasternak plays for the love of the sport and doesn't need a large contract train. This is what happens when you have somebody who is at that level who then goes, I would very much like money, because he's now got that big contract. And this is what happens to your roster development when a player like that goes, pay me what I'm worth. So, and everyone in the league's had to experience that. Boston has finally had to experience that. And unfortunately for them, just at the wrong time of development.
Yeah, they had a lot of good years for sure.
But, you're right.
I think for the bottom of this division, I think that the gap there between like Boston, Ottawa, Detroit is like not that big for me realistically. Like I think that Ottawa and Detroit have some things going for them. I'm not fully bought in on those teams yet. I think that as much as people want to get excited about Ottawa, I'm until I see something, I'm not really believing it.
I'm assuming that everybody in the group was thinking that I had forgotten about my normal hatred of the Montreal Canadiens. No. They're terrible. Look at the roster. If you have not, go to Cap Friendly, and I beg you to look at the Habs roster. If they weren't the Habs, if you just looked at that roster on paper, you would think they are definitely a bottom three team. They are terrible as a roster. But Cole Caulfield is going to have to score 1 billion points.
Which I'm not convinced is going to happen.
No, but there's not a lot. Most of the names on that roster are names of players who were projected to possibly be good, but
yeah, at one point in time, there's a lot of reclamation projects on that roster.
There's a lot of we're all on the Joel Armia hype train. We're all
I'm here in not Duran anymore, but Newhook and so forth.
They've taken the massive punt on Alex Newhook being good. Their defensive core though is utterly ridiculous. It's a stinker. Michael Matheson is your leading defenseman. Just settle on that for a minute, Montreal. Michael Matheson. Ouch. Anyway,
I like Mike Matheson, but he was,
not in that role.
He was probably like the third best defenseman in Pittsburgh when he was there.
And before anyone comes at me, we'll get to San Jose. We'll get there. So let's move on. The Central. Look, the top three in the Central are the top three in the Central, and I don't think anyone has any real differences there.
I mean, I don't think that the theoretical gap between Dallas and Colorado was that big. I think that could have potentially gone the other way. I kind of wavered on a little bit, but I felt like Dallas had better depth.
Can I just say, whoever it was who predicted Binnington is clearly a St. Louis fan, because we have one person who tipped that St. Louis would win the Central.
I would be shocked if that wasn't the same person.
Yeah, St. Louis are not good. St. Louis, they're not a bottom feeder, but they're not good. And
they're actually worse than I thought that they were. When I looked at their roster, I was surprised how quickly it drops off. Like, I like that top line of like Buchnevich, Thomas, and Kyrou. Like that's nice. After that, holy shit.
And the contracts.
Kasperi Kapanen is your second line right winger. Like, look, I like Cheeks Klapanen, but he is not a top six. Like, I've seen many games of him in two different organizations trying to be this guy. It just drops off real quick after that. Is all I'm going to say.
I mean, like if you look at the like Brendon Saad's there on $4.5 million. For 3 more years, and then you go down the list, and it's a little bit like one of my favorite Clarkson lines. It's a little bit like eating at a Scottish smorgasbord. There's a lot of things on the menu, none of which you recognize, and none of which sound very good. And the defense is made up of names that
It's all right.
But most of them are slightly past the peak of their powers. They're not horrible. Yeah. They're not completely falling off a cliff.
Exactly. Like that top four basically is really just summed up by that. Nick Leddy, Colton Parayko, Torrey Krug, and Justin Falk, all well past the peak of their careers.
Yep, they're all people that Now, sounds like St. Louis should be 8th call is because Chicago exists. Look, I don't care. Look, Connor Bedard will be.
There's some fucking stinker teams in the Central.
Connor Bedard will be absolutely brilliant and will probably score a boatload of points. But that roster is designed to come last.
Yeah,
it's built to come last.
I think that the culmination of St. Louis is okay. And that's who they were for a long time, and that's who they pretty much entirely went back to the moment after they won. They had that good run where they won that cup, and then they've just been kind of just okay.
St. Louis are like, we won the cup. We'll give everyone who won the cup a lovely contract to thank them for winning the cup, and that's it. And you know what? They got a cup. So they can do that, and good for them. It's like what Washington did. Washington won the cup and we've won one now. Cool, everyone have a contract. I think Chicago are going to be terrible, but I think Connor Bedard will keep them from being the worst team in the league. My big difference with yours is I think Winnipeg are terrible.
Look, I also think Winnipeg are terrible, but I also know that they have Connor Hellebuck and like 3 or 4 good players who will keep. And I think that they've been terrible for some time, but they've had those guys to keep them afloat. And I just couldn't see a situation. I couldn't see a reality where that much has changed previous to what they had previously.
I mean, my situation involves one of my predictions, which might involve one of those key players no longer being in Winnipeg. But
that obviously changes the arithmetic significantly.
I just feel like one of the sleeper teams, like there are very obviously bad teams.
Yeah.
Very obviously. By the way, I think Arizona will be a lot better than everyone thinks this year. They won't be great, but I think they'll be a lot better than everyone thinks they're going to be because they're giving them the time to all those prospects, and I think they'll take a few steps. But Winnipeg, if you go down and look at the Winnipeg roster, right, just look at it. It's not, again, there's a lot of teams that are really, I used to like saying about Vegas, and even though they won the cup, I still sort of believe it. They roll a bit like an egg. Now, Vegas fixed a lot of that up by Jack Eichel, which fixed a lot of problems they had. Yeah. They are really poorly constructed from a balance perspective, Winnipeg. Like, it's not well balanced the way that roster looks.
And I think they have a decent top six.
They've got a decent top six, but how many of them hate each other? Literally, part of the problem with Winnipeg, is who likes anybody in that dressing room? Who likes the coach? The coach
I'm not going
to
go to bat for Winnipeg for sure. Like, let me clarify this division rankings because obviously we don't put points or anything on this at this point in time. I only have 3 teams from this division.
Yeah, you think it's terrible.
That's Dallas, Colorado, Minnesota, and then a big fucking gap. And then, like a 15, 20 point gap. And then, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville kind of in, Arizona, all in that kind of murky. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if there was like 5 to 8 points difference between Winnipeg and Arizona in this, and then like a fucking another 20-point drop to Chicago.
I think the last game of the season, will determine draft order for about 5 of these teams. Like, it's going to be that close.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is too. There's a lot of comment about the arena taking a lot of effort away from the season. I don't think they know. I don't think they care. But the players literally don't care because if you've been in Arizona for any length of time, this has always been a thing. So I think that too many people put too much stock in the arena thing for the players in Arizona. I don't think it bugs them as much as you think it does. I don't think they care. They like the environment. Like like the environment in Mullet, right? They would like to be playing in front of more players, but they like the environment that they're playing in. And like, they don't get worried about what the hell's happening off the ice in terms of what site they're developing in Arizona. And they're going to develop a new site that's coming. Hoping to talk to PHNX Sports.
Yeah, like it's a few years away, obviously,
but in the meantime, I don't think the arena has the slightest bearing on like either the size of it, the number of people in it. I don't think it matters for Arizona. I think that you've also got to think about it. A large percentage of their players are like young, just coming into the league, and a lot of them are used to playing in like college style arenas. It's fine for them.
I have Arizona that low because they're not that great a team overall, not because of where they're playing.
No, I don't think that's got to do with it.
I think the thing that I want to talk about though with the Central is like, you have Nashville at 4 and like making the playoffs in your predictions. The thing for me with Nashville is I just don't know what to expect with them because this year in Nashville, it's like Forsberg, Yossi, and the kids. Like that's kind of their entire roster. Like they brought in Ryan O'Reilly to be their top line center, who was fourth line center on Toronto
by the end, basically.
But yeah, and there's just like a bunch of dudes there who theoretically might be good. I just don't know. Like Cody Glass is their second line center. I like Tommy Novak. I like Luke Evangelista, Parsonen, Trennan. Maybe not Trennan. Sissons I like, but like there's a bunch of guys there that like maybe some of these rookies turn out to be like really good, like Novak and Evangelista and so forth. I just don't know what to make of them. Maybe they're a decent team. Maybe they're bottom of the league. I don't have no fucking clue.
Part of my thing with Nashville, I mean, look, I already said, I think the major part of my thing with Nashville is that I think that UC Saros is about to stand on his head. But the other part of this,
that's the big thing that changes everything, really.
But the other thing that I think is really fascinating and where we haven't talked about it yet is that you have a brand new everything. You have Barry Trotz now in the big chair with $7.5 or almost $8 million in cap space still to play with. If he decides that they need to go out and sign somebody who's either a free agent or make a trade where they've got cap to do it with. The other thing you've got to think about is Andrew Brunette's finally getting his long-term shot at the league, who's been one of the most highly touted, this is the guy who should have had a job coaches going around. So I think you've got Andrew Brunette's got a point to prove that, he believes that he should have got the Florida job long term. And I think he was disappointed that he didn't. Brunette's been mentioned for every coaching vacancy for 12 months until he got this one. He's been every single time a vacancy. Andrew Brunette's the front runner. So I think Brunette is an interesting move. And again, I think Brunette did fairly well in the time that he spent in the chair in Florida. He seems to be a player's coach as well, and they seem to like that. I just feel like, again, it's also not that I think they're going to be amazing. That gap, as we said, between third and fourth, and then fourth to seventh is really a flip. And again, I just think that of Nashville, St. Louis, Arizona, and Winnipeg, I think Juuse Saros is going to be the most reliable, consistent goalie out of the four of them.
I'm kind of banking on that because I have him in a couple of fantasy leagues. But you remember when Nashville's D used to be like one of the best?
It was a beast. In the league. That was a beast.
After Roman Josi now, their D-core is Luke Shen on the top pairing, Ryan McDonough, Tyson Barrie, Dante Fabro, and Alexander Carrier. That is fucking putrid.
It is.
Basically, they're on Nashville right now. It's Forsberg, Josi, and Saros. You take away those three guys, and they're the worst team in the league.
Oh, if they get a major injury to one of those three, their season's absolute toast.
Yeah.
But I am relying on the idea that Juuse Saros is going to have a perfectly healthy season and absolutely steal it for them.
Yeah.
Remember, last year,
I'm talking myself into putting Arizona above Nashville right now, to be honest. I'm looking at this list and going, Jesus Christ, they're bad.
No. And look, as I said, I think it's a flip. Those ones are all a flip. Yeah. I will stand by the fact that I think that Winnipeg is the worst out of all of those, though. Because I just feel like something is
possible. It's
possible. Just feel, my whole thing with Winnipeg, I just feel like something is so wrong inside that locker room.
That feels like that's been the case for Winnipeg for 5 years, honestly. They've always should have been better on paper than they end up being.
And they keep talking about the idea of, Scheifele's going to go eventually. Well, he's going to go eventually. Well, he's going to go eventually. It's got to come at some point. Anyway, moving on, because let's get to the Pacific. All right, we've got the exact same top four.
Pretty close. We're real close there. Honestly, we just got Vancouver and Calgary the other way around.
Yeah, and that I think is a coin toss. Let's start with San Jose.
Yeah.
San Jose is the worst roster in the league. And I say this as a long-suffering Sharks fan.
Yeah.
The San Jose, we had a conversation yesterday where we were talking about players, and Brendon messaged me to ask about who was going to quarterback the power play.
So this isn't so much necessarily a question for me. This is a question that people involved in fantasy hockey and stuff have been asking the entire offseason. It's once they trade Erik Karlsson, it's who the fuck there has ever quarterbacked a power play?
So the answer as to who is probably going to quarterback the power play is probably Henry Thrun.
Yeah. So apparently when they got Jan Ruda in the trade, when they did the Carlson trade, they asked him hey, have you ever can you quarterback a power play? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess I kind of did it in junior or whatever at one point in time. And because that was trying to look around for it. Obviously, they've got a prospect coming in. Theoretically, maybe Thrun will be that, but otherwise it's holy shit.
So to give you an idea for people who we've talked about how bad defensive calls are. And at the moment, Thrun is not even listed on the defensive core. He's still listed down with all the prospects, as is McMadulan. But I think they're actually going to leave McMadulan out for the first half of the year, so he's not suffering. Legitimately, that was basically the conversation they had the other day. Was they like the way McMadulan's developing? They don't know if he needs to be around the Sharks playing like this. So Henry Thrun they got last year from Anaheim, and they were quite happy with the way he played at the end of the season, which is why I think he'll end up quarterbacking the power play. The defensive core for the San Jose Sharks is, of course, he's still there, Mark-Edouard Vlasic.
Of course.
My longest, I have tried.
Taxes and Mark-Edouard Vlasic.
The one Shark I have tried to trade, and people who have listened to this show for years know, I have every year tried to move Mark-Edouard Vlasic, and he's the only one left.
Since episode 1.
He's the only one left. Vlasic, Ferraro, Jan Ruda, Vadim Simek, Matt Benning, Nikolai Kisnyov, Kyle Burrows, Ty Emberson, Jacob McDonald. Add Henry Thurn to that.
Ty Emberson, I think they just picked up on waivers. So.
Yeah, they did. Literally, he was waived by he went under waivers from New York. The Sharks claimed him, and everyone went, "Why?
I don't
Why
get that.
have you claimed him?"
Because, like, how are they going to fit him in this roster with all of those defensemen they already have that are not good?
Terrible. So, look, the Sharks. So there's a lot of conversation in the media around, San Jose refuses to announce they're tanking. They refuse to tank. They're hybriding this. No, they're damn well tanking, but they can't say it because Hasso-Plattner wants people in the building.
A real good way to tank is to have a terrible decor and have like randos starting in goal for you.
Look. Of all of the things that they have in net, I'm actually comfortable with the net situation.
It's actually not as bad as I thought it was.
Kevin Karkinen and Mackenzie Blackwood.
I mean, they at least had like potential at one point in time.
I think the plan. I think the plan is to
great, but
I think the plan is to move Mackenzie Blackwood at the trade deadline. I think that's the plan because they've got him for an extra year as well. I think that's the plan is that he's okay enough that a playoff contender goes. We need some depth, but. Yeah. The Sharks, basically, I would anticipate, even though they've got modified no trades and no moves, I would expect that either Logan Couture or Thomas Hertl goes before the end of the year. I feel like Logan Couture and Dallas makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But that's hard for Dallas to work, but we'll see what happens there. The rest of it, like Anthony Duclair, Mike Hoffman, again, these are people that have been good. But Fabian Zetterlund is decent young. Philip Zadina, I'm so pleased we've got Zadina, and he's looked good so far in preseason, but it's preseason. William Eklund is going to get a run with the team this year because he is probably our best player. And and he really is very good. And they've tried to spare him from the mess, but I think it's time to bring Eklund up and give him a full year. He was our player of the year last year, despite the fact he only played a third of the season. Outside of Carlson, it was him. The thing is, San Jose, in terms of the prospects coming through, they've actually done a decent job of restacking the cupboard. Thomas Bordelot might find himself called up, but I'd probably leave him out of the way. So, by the way, we are currently streaming on YouTube, Jimmy, for those who are asking. It's on YouTube. But in terms of what they've got in the system, Ozzy Weisblatt, Philip Beidstadt, they've got some really good young players coming through, and that doesn't take into account Smith and who we got in the last draft. The future's getting there, but we're going to be but we're going to be absolutely terrible.
Will be starting to go. Yeah, obviously, like
we're going to be absolutely terrible, and if we are vaguely good, I will be upset.
Yeah. Now, I think that we can jump ahead slightly and say that we both picked San Jose to get like the first overall pick.
Yeah. And we need the damn thing. But overall, I think Vegas will win the Pacific again. I don't think Brendon knows this. Everyone watching knows this. I don't like the Oilers in terms of I still think they are a badly constructed roster that just happens to have two high-scoring superstars.
I want to be clear. I don't think there's any team that you actually like in this division apart from the Sharks.
I think Seattle's built okay. And as much as it pains me to say it, I actually think that LA has done an amazingly good job.
I think LA has done a really good job.
I hate the fact that LA has done a good job.
Yeah.
Because I hate LA.
But they're pretty solid, honestly.
I think LA and Seattle have done the best job at roster construction.
LA built a really good prospect pool and have kind of like really managed to turn things around. Like obviously that they bottomed out for a while, without completely bottoming out. Like they managed somehow to actually turn it around without getting rid of Kopitar and Doughty, which is difficult to do.
And I mean, look, I said, I really, we've talked about it before. I'm a massive Quinton Byfield fan. And I think they've done a really good job in bringing him through and not giving him too much pressure. And I think he'll have another massive step this year. I just like the way that LA and Seattle have gone about things, which is interesting because neither of us liked their draft. But I think what they've done since then in the way that they've sort of put that structure together, they've done a little bit of what New Jersey have done in terms of it's the sum of the parts rather than the parts. And Hextall, who knew that Dave Hextall could actually coach hockey? No, I didn't. Philadelphia didn't give us any indication. So look, I think they've done a decent job. Whether Seattle has a bit of a step backwards in like a second season, but I don't think that there's. I've only gone with 4 from the Pacific because
yeah. So I mean, I couldn't justify putting like St. Louis or Winnipeg or Nashville in over Calgary. I looked at Calgary and look. Well, I don't think that they're incredible. I think that a lot of those guys are due a bounce back. I think that they had a pretty decent run towards the end of the season, after some kind of, coming out of the gate skidding after, the Hugo trade and Kadri and all this kind of stuff. It didn't really kind of work out for them at the start. But I think that Calgary are kind of starting to put it together a little bit. I'm not ready to pick them as anything other than a wild card, but I just couldn't put some of those central teams in over them. So I have 5 teams surprisingly making it the playoffs from the Pacific.
The other problem is too, Vancouver and Calgary have traditionally been teams that can't get out of their own way.
Yeah, but I do think it's a flip between those. Like I could see Vancouver or Calgary making it.
The problem. So I wouldn't be surprised if Calgary does finish above Vancouver. For me, it depends on if Vancouver shoot themselves in the foot again. And they seem to, every time they look like they're getting themselves out of trouble, they do something like go out and sign JT Miller to a ridiculously large contract for a long period of time, for a massive amount of money. Like they can't seem to stop themselves. And
I like Vancouver's top end better than Calgary, but I like Calgary's bottom end better than Vancouver. Because Vancouver has that same thing where after Quinn Hughes, there's just like nothing there on the defense. I like Philip Hughes, not for what they're paying him, but
if Quinn Hughes drops for any particular reason in terms of he gets injured, Vancouver should be trading for as many first round picks as humanly possible.
Yeah, they have top 4 Ian Cole, which was dicey when he was like
good
Cup winner, Ian Cole in 2017. Look, there's some question marks there for sure.
And the question Jimmy just asked in the chat about, do you think Lucic back to the Bruins is a big hit for the Flames? No,
I don't think they give a shit.
I don't think at this point of his career, unfortunately,
it's been a while, unfortunately, since Lucic was
relevant. Yeah, exactly. He's not really relevant in any way, shape, or form at this point in time. He's a body, and the Bruins needed a body that everyone loved, and that's why he's back in Boston. All right, so let's go into the really interesting bit of this now. First of all, this is where we get to our end of the season. Well, before we do that, I should quickly just run through what the last of the predictions were for everyone. So Pacific, most people had Edmonton, only one person picked Vegas. Interesting. The Metro was a New Jersey Carolina split, as I said. The Central was interesting. Dallas was overwhelmingly the favorite. And as I said, Minnesota, and then that one St. Louis vote. The Atlantic was Toronto massively, and then Florida and Boston. So there's some hope.
Yeah, there's some hopefuls in Boston.
All right.
I get it. Obviously, you just came off President's Cup, but
so let's go.
This is true.
Because this is where we get interesting. The conference finals. I have gone in the West, Dallas versus Vegas. You have gone Edmonton, Dallas. And in the East, we'll go through both of them, then we'll go through why. East, I've gone Carolina, Buffalo, and you've gone New Jersey versus Toronto. Okay. First year I haven't made a Toronto in a conference final pick. So let's start with the West. I think it's probably some combination. I still, again, it's really obvious by now. I don't need to restate it. I don't trust the Edmonton Oilers. I feel like it's been shown that you can get at them, and unless they do something to correct that defensive frailty, I think that Edmonton can be got at.
Yeah, for me, I think that I've just been kind of watching McDavid trying to drag the Oilers kicking and screaming through playoff success for such a long time that I feel like eventually he just has to succeed at it. I just want to hope, and maybe this is just some small part of me that desperately wants him to have some success at this point in his career after just years of just never getting there. And I just feel like almost accidentally at some point in time, he has to stumble through and make it to a conference final.
See, for me, my point on it is that if it finishes the way I have it finishing, Edmonton play LA in round 1 again.
Yeah.
And LA play Edmonton really well.
That's a good point. Yeah, look,
And
I'll be honest. I didn't look at like what the bracket would look like when I made these predictions. I didn't like kind of try to piece together like a bracket and see how that would have played out. I might have picked slightly different options if I did, but
I've got sick of, to be honest with you, I've got sick of losing the predictions to you. So I really thought about it. The East is fascinating because you've gone with what would be considered probably the safe picks of New Jersey, Toronto. Makes sense.
I mean, like I guess I kind of picked the I guess with all four of mine, like if you look at all four of mine, apart from Edmonton, I have like the people that I predict to win those divisions. You know, I really kind of I went a little bit scratch here with these picks in that I picked the teams that I felt were the strongest overall teams. Whether or not, you know, taking into play like account playoff voodoo and teams that, you know, can't get it done, all that kind of shit. I didn't think too much about that. I tried to just kind of, you know, pick the strongest teams. The difference I went with Edmonton over Vegas is that I felt like Vegas having just won and having that, you know, deep run and all that kind of stuff maybe just wouldn't have the legs in them to make it that far again. You know, it's very hard to make the cup final 2 years in a row, and like I think that I just kind of had them faltering because of that, and that's why I didn't pick them in those top four. But New Jersey, I felt like was the strongest team in the Metro, and Toronto, I felt was easily the strongest team in the Atlantic.
So, again, part of the thing with me with Edmonton is I agree with you on your logic in terms of tiredness, except in Edmonton, you only need two people to be tired.
Yeah.
And if they're tired and if they're worn out from maybe, I don't know, carrying an entire team on their backs,
that's true.
That's going to...
I absolutely see that logic.
You can't play them for over 25 minutes every single night because you need to play them. And have them get into a playoff situation and have them run through the playoffs like that.
The only thing I will say to that is they might be the only two players in the league that you can.
Yeah, but we've seen them do it before and try to get through that. We've also seen it where it has broken them before. We've seen McDavid get injured. We've seen it happen. So sure. The East for me.
Yeah.
So the East for me involves a couple of things. First of all, again, I looked at the playoffs, and as I said, I have Toronto playing Tampa.
Yeah.
And I have Toronto playing Tampa, and by that point of the year, I think it will be a fairly fit and healthy Tampa, and I think you'll probably also have Steven Stamkos over whatever strop he's currently throwing. And also, who knows who they will have rested for the entirety of the season to bring back in the playoffs. So, like, that could be really interesting. I think Buffalo may have, if it pans out the way that I think it will, I think Buffalo will walk over the top of Florida. I think Carolina will easily push past, you know, whoever they're going to end up playing. And I just feel like Carolina has a little bit more experience than everyone else. And they've got players who have been a bit more experienced in other situations, not even necessarily in Carolina. I think Brendon Moore's good. And I just feel like New Jersey's time will come.
Yeah.
I think it might be one more playoff run away.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's yet. Like, that's the thing. Like, you know, obviously for them to actually make the playoffs and go deep or whatever, like, I probably went a little bit bold with picking them to go that far.
I mean, you can say that, but I picked Buffalo to make the conference
Yeah,
final,
that's true. So. I mean, like, I think we both went. The interesting thing, I think, is that we're at a point now where I don't think that there's a real obvious favorite. I don't think that there's a team that people are screaming at, like, how could you not pick?
There's no Colorado.
X team, you know, like this, you know, this team's clearly the obvious head and shoulders team that's better than everyone else or whatever. I don't think that we've had that. And I don't think we've really had that for a couple of years. And I think that's a good thing in terms of, you know, all of these other teams are kind of becoming relevant that haven't been relevant for a long time. It's exciting that we're talking about teams like New Jersey and Buffalo, who have been awful for a long time, being potential contenders.
One of the biggest weaknesses for the NHL is the reason this has happened. The reason why this has happened, and this is something that, you know, none of us really want to hear because we don't want it to be true. But the fact that the salary cap screwed up post-COVID is what's made this happen. Because the big teams can't get better because they locked all their players up to bigger contracts and there's no cap flexibility. So players have had to go elsewhere for game time and players have had to go elsewhere to get their shot. And general managers at teams that have been in that mid-pack have had to be more creative. And so you've seen some more development. You've seen some people, you know, and it's, you know, like Jimmy commented, they're Toronto. Toronto's one of them, but it's happened all over the league. Like the cap.
A lot of those teams have stagnated. A lot of those teams have had a hard time, improving. Like, you just have to look at, what Jubas did with Pittsburgh and how rare that is, that for someone to be able to go out and add an $11 million player, and move out the pieces required from a roster to make that happen. There's just not that many GMs in the league that are making big swings like that are able to make that kind of cap, massaging work realistically.
And
the cap's been.
And look at, for example, like we talked about it before, like Toronto was brought up as the example because they're the obvious one. But look at Boston, for example.
Yeah.
Like Boston, at the tail end of being good, had to spend the money on Pasternak, hamstringing the ability for them to actually go out and rebuild the roster properly. Like, they lost players that they were desperate to keep. Bertuzzi, for example, because they had zero cap movement. Absolutely zero. Because they signed one player to a big contract. Forget the idea of, Toronto's big four. Toronto's got their big four plus a bunch of people on medium to low contracts. Right? The big four hamstring them, but there are a lot of other teams where they've had to put somebody on a big deal, like Edmonton. Like, one of the reasons Edmonton doesn't work is because you've got Draisaitl and McDavid on good, really big money. Well, what are you going to do with the rest of the roster? Right? What are you going to do with the rest of that roster? You really are limited. You want to bring in a superstar. Like, Edmonton wanted to bring in Erik Karlsson.
Yeah.
They couldn't, because there was not a chance in hell that money was going to work.
Yeah.
Because you just didn't have the flexibility. So,
look, if we think about 4 years ago, everyone thought the cap now was going to be
and it was going up
$10 million higher. Yeah, like everyone expected it to be significantly higher by now. And obviously that, but like, not to take anything away from some of these teams that have been building for a long time. Like, how long have Buffalo been rebuilding? How long have New Jersey been rebuilding? Like, these teams haven't been, like actual contenders for a decade or more. They've been in the build for that long, and it's finally kind of coming together for them.
Yeah, and to give you an idea, just to sort of
Carolina too,
to give you an idea of the cost of being good. Okay, the cost of being good. Toronto at the moment is still $2 million over the cap.
Yeah,
they've still got to shed people, even with LTI, and all of these are even with LTIR. Right, Vegas is still technically just over the cap. They'll squeak under just. If you look at the idea of, like, for example, if you go and look at Boston are 400,000 under the cap. There's no wriggle room in Boston. They have absolutely no ability to move. Tampa is still over the cap, right? These teams, Edmonton is still technically over the cap, right? All of these teams that should be really, really stand out amazingly good are over the cap, or have like maybe 100 to 400,000 to spend. That is not a single contract. You can't sign a contract for under the 850 min, right? So you've got a situation where these teams that would normally be really good and need one piece to get better can't, because there's no cap flexibility there. So you've got to come up with other creative means to do it, or you've got to change your system. And the problem is the systems that are working in the playoff, in the regular season, to get you into the playoffs, haven't been working in the playoffs, because the playoffs have those. Part of the reason is because the referees put the whistles away and everything plays different. So what works in the regular season isn't working in the playoffs anymore, but you can't go and get the specialists to play the playoffs because that doesn't work in the regular season because they get suspended. So it's really weird. Let's go to the cup winner. So the cup winner, I've got Carolina over Vegas. You've got Dallas over New Jersey.
Yeah. And I think that I can just sum that up by saying, who fucking knows? I had to pick a team. I didn't come into this expecting to like Dallas as much as I did. I saw one of the early predictions that someone put in where they were really high on Dallas, and I went, oh, that's weird. And then I started looking into it today and really kind of looking at rosters and trying to work out like who I liked in the West. And I kind of went, oh shit, Dallas is real good compared to a lot of these teams. Like, there's so many teams that have like some weaknesses, and they just don't really have like an obvious glaring weakness in that regard. And for me, like, I'm probably maybe a little bit too high on New Jersey in that regard, because I think that they are weak in goal. But if it all comes together, if for some reason like a Kira Schmidt or someone turns into like, an incredible goalie for them, which is entirely possible, then all that goes away. But I don't know. We'll see. I think that there's a bunch of teams that could make it to the Cup final, and I just kind of had to pick one of them, to be honest.
It's a bit the same, but I kind of, as I said, Carolina have been good consistently for the last few years.
I could absolutely see Carolina getting there.
And, Carolina have had, they've been goalied a couple of times. They've had freak situations pop up where a team just gotten ridiculously white hot. I kind of feel like at some point that Carolina build is going to work, and
I think especially if they make it to play against Vegas, they're two teams that kind of have that same problem of having like a shitload of playmakers and no real kind of game-breaking scorers.
Also, Brett Burns plays Vegas really well.
Yeah, and there could just be two. It could just be a whole series of 2-1 games, to be honest.
Yep. And I went Sebastian Aho for the Conn Smythe because someone from that team has to win it. You went Robertson, I'm assuming, because if they're going to win, he'll score the goals.
It's going to be him. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the last part of this now, which is not on those predictions. We no longer have anything written on there. However, what we have to talk about instead is our ridiculous predictions. So they're not so much ridiculous. They're our way out.
We like to have 3 bold predictions just to kind of, because if we haven't taken any big swings, and I think I've honestly taken more swings this year than I usually do.
You have. I'm normally the one who's way out on a limb.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty conservative with my picks, but so in comparison, I actually don't think that my bold predictions are that bold. But
mine aren't either. Mine aren't either. But it's really hard to make bold predictions this year.
I think it is a little bit this year. I don't think that there's something that's like an obvious big swing to make it on. So I tried to kind of identify things that I thought are like maybe like what could go well or badly. And I already talked about this a little bit. So my first big prediction was that Tampa ends up riding out the Vasilevsky injury just fine, and that was baked into my projection for them to still be second in the Atlantic. And I don't know. I think everyone's kind of writing them off because of it, and I don't know. I could just see them having the way that NHL teams work. It's so hard to just go on a completely awful losing streak.
I agree with that. I think they'll push through. I don't think there'll be a problem there. My first bold prediction is that the Jets are going to trade Connor Hellebuck at the deadline.
I can see that. Absolutely.
I feel like they'll be mid, and they'll be struggling, and I think that situation, a lot of people are like, they fixed the situation now by getting rid of a couple of the problems. No, one of the biggest problems is still in your locker room and still would like to leave. And there's somebody is going to need a goalie. And Hellebuck will be there, and I think someone's going to take a swing. So I think the first big one that I'm going to say is I think Connor Hellebuck is traded at the deadline.
That'd be cool. It's so rare to see a big goalie move, but I hope that might be the case. So this one's maybe my least bold of all of them, but I do think that the Penguins make it back to the playoffs, but only make it to the second round. I can't see them realistically. Like, it would be amazing for them to go on a dream run and go deep. And the Metro is just so good. I think that they might like knock out a team. Like, let's say they end up playing like New York or someone. I could see them winning, but I just can't see them getting deep. I can't see them getting past that second round. Oh, I think Chris is frozen on us. Oh no. Well, hopefully the rest of you guys can still hear me. While I wait for Chris to come back in and he talks about his other ones, let's talk about some of the other predictions that some other people made. Oh, Chris is messaging me. Yeah, all good. So some of the predictions that people made from the group was Quinn Hughes breaking 90 points. I think that's pretty bold. I'm not sure that the math for that necessarily works. Like, that's pretty historic in terms of the points that he puts up. My prediction for him is probably closer to something like 70-75 for this season. It would be incredible if he did that. That would be awesome to see. I would love to see that as someone who owns Quinn Hughes in a dynasty league. I would love that. One person predicted that Connor Bedard doesn't have a breakout season. I don't know. This feels like a real hipster thing to me, of people just like wanting to naysay the next big player. People did this shit about Connor McDavid. People just like hating on the new kind of superstar kind of guy. I don't know. It's just not a fun prediction for me. I want him to be good. Like even if he's on a team that I hate, I would really like him to just be an exciting player to watch. Leafs make it to the conference final and lose in 4. That would be interesting. I think that honestly the thing for me that makes me kind of like hesitant about this one is I think that they would see that as a success. Like if they make it to the conference final and get swept, like that's a step up from where they were previously. That I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I can see that happening theoretically. Someone honestly, I think this may be the biggest bold one that I've seen is Blackhawks make the playoffs. I think that they have a more chance of finishing last than they do of making the playoffs. Honestly, like if you look at like the predictions that we made about the Central, they have to be better than, I don't know. Could they be better than like Seattle, Vancouver, Nashville, St. Louis? I don't know. That's tough. That's a real tough ask for a team that literally is like Connor Bedard and just like a bunch of dudes. Let's see if I can get Chris back in here. He has asked me to add him back in, and I don't know how to do that, and it is terrifying me. Let's see if I can. While I wait for him to explain how to do it, another bold prediction: Knights out in the first round. I could absolutely see that happening. We talked about the fatigue that teams have after winning the cup. Like that's probably more likely to happen than them going deep again, realistically. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I do not know how to get Chris back in here. We may have to slightly restart the stream to finish this off. We were so close to finishing too. I like someone's bold prediction was just Seattle. I don't understand what that means. I don't understand the context of that. That is not a prediction of its own, but cool. And Winnipeg makes the cup final. That is really bold. That might be close to Blackhawks make the playoffs. Not quite as close, honestly. I think that Winnipeg making the cup final is slightly more logical in that it maybe has like a 1% chance of happening, but probably not. But yeah, probably very unlikely. So let me talk about my final one before we try and get Chris back in here to talk about his final last two. Look, I didn't want to rag on everyone's predictions, but look, they're bold for a reason. That's the point of being bold. My final one is that I think that Patrick Kane signs with a team, but is just like a total non-factor. I think at this point in his career, like Patrick Kane kind of had this like tiny bit of relevance again when he went back to like New York at points. Like there were flashes where he would do something legitimate, but he's had like, kind of negative impact really for like the last couple of years when you look at like his underlying numbers in terms of like, obviously we talked about he's a terrible defensive player, but previously he made up for that by being like a really good offensive player, but it just hasn't really been there in terms of his offensive impact in the last like year or two. And I don't know at this point in his career after major surgery, like maybe it's possible that fixed everything and there's a spark of something like, still there and he can piece it together, especially in like a shortened season. Like, let's say he joins a team in like December or something like that and like just has like a short run at age 35 and just puts it all out on the line. I could see him being, something to give, but I think that there's a non-zero chance that he isn't just kind of like a third line quality player and just kind of ends up retiring at the end of the season. So that's my bold prediction. I just don't think that he really was, obviously I know he's banged up, but I just don't think he really did anything that significant in New York either that compared to a depth player that they could have gotten for that same kind of run. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not totally convinced on Patrick Kane at this point in his career. I don't think he's going to be nothing. If they sign him to a minimum, contract or something like that, then, that's fine. But I don't know. That's just me. I had to make a bold prediction, and I think that maybe Patrick Kane's done in terms of relevance in the NHL. Here we go. Chris is coming in. Let me see if I can get him back. Are you? Can you guys hear? Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get him in. I don't know. I don't know. No, I don't know if anyone else can hear you. Unfortunately, I think because Chris started the stream, it won't let me add him back in. Can anyone else hear Chris? No, we can still only hear. No, unfortunately, we can still only hear me. Sorry about that, guys. Look, I may have to. We may have to restart this in a second. Let's see. I will wrap this up. We might restart again just for a couple of minutes and just look. Let's talk about Chris's. I have Chris's here. I will talk about them, and I will try not to rebuff them too much, and then I'll start to wrap it up, and then we'll probably just call it a night. Realistically, we're 2 hours in at this point in time, and you probably don't need to hear 5 more minutes of Chris talking about the Sharks anyway. So last two for Chris. Keith fired after Leafs are out in the first round. That seems honestly not that bold at all. That seems very likely to me. I think that's entirely likely for the Leafs. It is the Leafs after all. It could very likely happen. And if that happens, I think that Keefe is the next guy on the chopping block. Realistically, like they're not going to sign they're not going to get rid of the GM they just brought in. They're going to get rid of Keefe, who's pretty much been. Had a question mark over him when the new GM came in. When Dubas left and he came in, it was always, it was a question mark of whether he would stay. Like they've got that bullet in the gun to when something starts to go wrong to get rid of him. I think that's absolutely the move that they would make if they went out in the first round again. Oh, look, we've got Chris back.
Wow, it's amazing. Sorry, everybody. No, my internet provider decided to kill the internet for 5 minutes, which is great.
It's exactly what you need in the middle of a podcast.
So to go through my prediction, because I was listening the whole way through. So first of all, with my just back to my first bold prediction there as well. So we'll start with the Leafs one. So my Leafs prediction about them going out in the first round is I don't think the roster's built properly, and I think that they've got enough to get them through the regular season because that's all good. I don't think that the Ryan Reeves, etc. build works. So
what do you mean? It's totally worked all these playoff teams that he's been on.
I don't believe that that's going to work. So I kind of feel like the Leafs will go out in the first round. They'll lose to Tampa, and that'll kind of be the end of it. The other thing, just quickly on my Jets trading Hellebuck at the deadline, because I had another point to make on that before my internet died. And the other point that I had to make on that was that next year the cap goes up significantly. Whoever trades for Connor Hellebuck will have the opportunity to extend him. So that is the other reason why I think the Hellebuck trade is going to happen. My last one of the big predictions, Lou Lamoriello is going to announce his retirement. I think it's time. I think he's treading water in the island, really.
Yeah.
He's not having an impact, and I can't see him wanting to just fade out, and I can't see him wanting to try to keep pushing. I think he's done. And
I think he's been done for a while, honestly. Like with some of the deals that he's been signing, I just feel bad for whoever comes in and replaces him. Like some of the long-term deals that he's made are just going to hamstring whoever takes over for the next 5 years.
Yeah, they're utterly horrible. So I think that Lamoriello's done. Overall, I think the problem is it's very hard to make bold predictions this year because there's no room. Normally there's the ability. Normally, you've got the ability to do it. I think the other big thing, too, is I don't think there's going to be that many massive moves because next year's the cap year. So I think that there's a lot of teams that are standing pat. And I think all of the big things, I think we're going to have a bold predictions segment before the draft next year because I think we're going to see a ton of movement before the draft. But I don't think it's going to happen in the regular season. I think everyone's playing this season out with eyes on a $10 million cap raise next year. That's it. Everyone's playing this year out going, cap goes up by 10 next year.
Yeah.
So I think it's about 10 and a half is probably about right.
I think that there's from what I've heard, I think that there's like a 2-level jump where I think it goes up by something like 5 or whatever, and then it goes up by like 10 or whatever after. Like it's significant. It's a big jump over the next couple of years.
But the other thing is too, if the players escrow is paid back, but that was the reason why it didn't go up this year, is because the players could have elevated the cap significantly this year, or the escrow could, but they had to pay back escrow to do it. So because the players were like, no, we're not paying the escrow back this year, that's why the cap didn't go anywhere. So next year, I think the cap will
So here we go. So 87.7 is the estimated cap currently for next year, for next season, which is about a little bit over 4 million up from what we're at currently. And then 92 is what it'll be in 2025 is the current estimates from the athletic art.
The other interesting part, and we'll finish it up in a second because we've gone long, but the other interesting part about this, I think, is that it also depends on rights. It depends on, I think a lot's going to depend on what happens with the Bally Sports fallout. And if you haven't followed that, Bally Sports, who own the rights to a bunch of teams like the Flyers and stuff like that, went broke and just stopped showing games. So these clubs have all talked about the fact that they're finding other ways to show their games, but it's going to depend on what they come up with. So the rights are going to play a massive part. It also depends. There's also been rumors about Sportsnet possibly wanting to renegotiate part of their deal. Also, what happens with the ESPN deal going forward as well. So there's a lot that plays into that. I don't think it'll be 4. I think it'll go up by more than 4. Probably not to the 10. We may get a 5 or a 6, and then we might get the full 10 in 2 years' time. But it will be enough of a raise where I think players will be able to get a bit more movement going, and I think that's going to be really important. There's a reason a lot of players come off contract next year. So anyway, and with that, thank you everyone for sticking with us. Thank you everyone for joining us. We've really enjoyed this episode. It's always a fun one. So we will be back probably in time for the start of the regular season. So until next time, we will catch you all later.
Thanks, man. See ya.